Hello, everybody. Welcome to this Organise 2020 session on how we make our digital organising as effective as it's absolutely possible for it to be. My name's John Wood. I'm the digital manager at the TUC, and I work with our affiliate unions on our digital lab project. And I'm very pleased to be able to introduce our guest presenter, Sam Jeffers. Sam's got a really long CV in political and social campaigning online, and he's been working with us on the digital lab project over the last 18 months and been really invaluable, helping unions come together to kind of find and share best practice in loads of issues of digital change. And he's worked with unions in the UK and the Republic of Ireland on helping them sign up members more easily and engage with them more effectively. So you may also know Sam from his role as the founder of the Who Targets Me campaign for transparency in online political advertising, which has had some brilliant results in forcing change into the murky world of how politics happens on social media. I've got an apology, unfortunately, in that our listed speaker, Yasmin Aslam of Forward Action, hasn't been able to join us today, but we really appreciate that. She was able to record a kind of quick last-minute video for us yesterday afternoon, covering some of what she was intending to tell us in person. So we'll be able to introduce that and bring her in later in the session. Before we start, just a few words, please, about how we're going to run the session. We've got a presentation on the subject, and we're going to have opportunity at the end to take specific questions. And you do that by hitting the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. Try not to put your questions in the chat, please, or we may well lose track of them as they scroll upwards. We'll try to get as much as we can answered during the session. But if you want to comment or chat on what you're hearing as you go, just please add anything to the chat room. It is important to us that Organise 2020 is a safe space of solidarity and of mutual respect. We've got our code of conduct for our participants at all our events, which I'll post into the chat in a minute. Please be mindful of that and mindful of each other when you're commenting. And to let you know also that we're going to be recording the session, and we're going to try to make a video of all this as soon as available as soon as possible afterwards. Brilliant. So now that you all know where the 5 exits and loos are, we thanks and welcome very much for joining this session on online optimization. We've been hearing throughout the last few days of Organise 2020 about some really great tactics and case studies of doing union organising digitally. But whatever we're trying, we've also got to consider how we are actually going to get people to take those actions with us. We can have the best technology in the world, but if we're not setting our projects up right, we risk having people drop out before they complete what we want them to do. And Sam is going to give us a few insights into how the way that we approach our digital organising, whether it's national or branch levels, can help us make everything as effective as it can be. So without any further ado, over to Sam.
Thanks, John. I'm going to share my screen. Let's make that work. And hopefully I can click present. And then, John, you're the only person I can see, so just nod if it's visible. Visible? Okay, okay, cool. So, and excuse me if I look over here occasionally, because the screen that has the presentation on it is over here and you're all over here. So apologies for any impersonal thing, but then again, we're all on Zoom. So yeah. Okay, so I'm going to talk today, like John says, about making better digital services. And what I wanted to try and do was to think about that in a quite general way. So an approach that you can take to thinking about the way that you offer digital things to members and prospective members, such that you've got some kind of techniques and some practices that are probably more to do with embedding digital ways of thinking into organizations rather than necessarily any specific answer. And then towards the end of the session, as John says, we'll move on to Yasmin's case study, which is a much more specific run through of kind of piloting and testing and optimizing in that type of way. So we've got some kind of like the first bit will be methods, and then the last bit will be some specific ideas around how you might increase the uptake and the response rates to some of the things that you might choose to make digitally. So I'm going to start a little bit of intro about why we're doing this. Why should we be working on our digital services? This conceptual idea of like, what's the quickest and cheapest way to make what people call lean or user-centric, member-centric type services that people will actually want to use and will find, that sort of satisfy their needs and that potentially they even find enjoyable to use. And then Yasmin's piece is about the prototypes to sort of data-driven improvements and pilots, and then we'll open things up for some discussions and questions. So why do we work on digital services? So obviously, I think we're all here in a very different world at the moment, where suddenly we're having to do these conferences and events like these and all of our meetings virtually. Digital is the mainstream. Many people have adopted these techniques in their work already. Most people are online. Most people have a mobile phone. Most people now have a smartphone. Most services are delivered in some way, at least, digitally. So we have to accept that that's absolutely the mainstream. And there's been an explosion of new services in response to that. So, from the way that we call a cab, to order food, to the way we talk to each other, to the way that we, buy cars, buy houses, talk to each other, all of these sorts of things, absolutely, mainstream. And many of these services are beautiful and people choose to use them over and above any of the older ways of doing things. Look at how many young people look at their phone when it rings and prefer to text instead. There's different ways of interacting with each other as a result of this explosion of new services. And then customer services and customer expectations, member expectations are rising faster than ever. And the things that we have to judge what we do against are getting better all the time. So, the last blockbuster video is long gone. Netflix has replaced it. And we've chosen those things that give us a kind of beautiful, seamless, instantaneous experience over the things that went before that were more inconvenient, less personalized, less sort of delightful to use. So everything we do, whether it's, in the union world particularly, is being judged against a higher bar to be found elsewhere. And so through the Digital Lab, which is this project we're working on with John over the last sort of year and a half or so, we've been using a definition that we've actually stolen from the UK government. The UK government has put a lot of money into investing in its digital services and trying to create things that citizens find, meet their expectations and are kind of delightful to use. And so this definition is from one of the kind of original founders of the government digital service, a guy called Tom Loosemore. And he describes digital as not being about technology or anything else. It's about applying the culture, practices, processes, and technologies of the internet era to respond to people's raised expectations. And I think the thing that I'm interested in talking about today is actually as much about culture, practices, and processes. It's going to be very little conversation of technology whatsoever. But in order to get you thinking about how to tackle problems in a way that's user-centric, tackle problems in a way where you are doing work incrementally and learning as you go. And some of those practices embody the best ways of building things such that they're efficient, that they meet the expectations of a member and so on. And the other line here is, sort of digital services that are so good people prefer to use them. I mean, I've been working for the last couple of years on join online projects, quite a lot of join online projects for unions. And, what we see is that the moment you offer a good join online process, people instantaneously switch. We've had, I just launched a project recently in Ireland, which is where I am today, where the union previously had no join online. And during the pandemic, we quickly put together an online joining process, and now essentially 100% of new joiners are joining online. People have just switched instantaneously from the old kind of print PDF, fill it out, post it in, to completing the form online, having their application processed in the background, and they become a member instantaneously. So we're moving from a process where maybe it took them weeks or months to become a member. By the time they'd got a form, filled it in, sent it in, responded to queries, completed the whole process, been processed, been approved by the branch, et cetera, to a place where now they're essentially a member within 30 seconds of clicking, submit on the join form. So, that type of shift is happening all over the place. And I suppose what I'm looking at today is how do we discover and invent and improve ways of bringing those shifts online in order that you make members happy. So the question I suppose I ask in that respect is, if unions were starting today, if you were, founding your union right now, what would it look like? How would it operate? And because we're not there, the question is, how might we become that? How might we move more in that direction to embrace this idea of the kind of cultural practices that we're trying to follow? So one of the things that the TUC's put together, and I think is really useful, is a set of digital principles. Hopefully you can see these on the screen, but I'll go through them just because I think they're an incredibly useful way of thinking about digital projects and how you embrace this idea of change. So the first is being driven by data, and that's not necessarily all digital data, that's any type of research, any type of understanding what members want and need, what they think, understanding their lives, but trying to build that up in a way that's rigorous enough that you can draw, realistic conclusions from it and then respond to those conclusions. The second thing is committing realistic resources. It's impossible to build a Netflix for, £10,000. It's impossible to build, a perfect organising platform for next to no money, but we can start to explore those ideas very cheaply and very quickly and start to learn, are they working before we scale them up? And I think that's a big lesson of the internet, is that you don't necessarily need to build for a big launch and a big reveal moment. You can learn and test and improve slowly. And as you begin to learn and begin to become confident in the fact that you're, what you're trying to achieve, you can then commit greater and greater resources to it as you start to change. The third digital principle is about starting with user needs and keeping them involved. And there's a very formal method for thinking about what user needs are, and trying to solve them. As a member, I need to join a union so that I can get protection at work. This is almost a very formal phrase for it, but the essential core is, it's not about the organisation. If the organisation solves problems for the member, then the member will be happy, the member will stay engaged, the member will stay a member, the member will recommend the union to others, the union will be more effective, and everyone will kind of move forward together. So the organisation is in service in this concept of those member needs. The fourth thing, and I probably said it already, but taking small steps and learning as you go. Again, you're constantly testing assumptions in building digital things. What's the thing that we don't know? How can we find out about it? And how will that let us move forward? So again, in some of the sessions we go forward, I'll talk a little bit about like the idea of these big assumptions and what you might want to do to take that forward. Understanding the problem before creating a solution. Again, like how do you explore a problem before potentially writing a brief and giving it to a digital agency, or hiring someone to come in and work on a project, or reorganizing your whole way of operating around doing a particular thing. Can you get a really deep understanding of the problem before you go ahead and change things? Everything we do helps build the union. And again, like one of the things I want to talk about today is this idea of looking across the member journey, looking at improving things and removing pain points from the member experience at different places. And again, happier members builds the union, builds people's confidence in the fact that the union will deliver for them, and again, makes for a more effective union in doing so. Making things usable and familiar. Again, one of the focuses I often have is there's so many digital tools out there that already do a lot of the jobs that we might be looking to do in this space. There's so many things out there for capturing data, or getting people to send in their stories, or these sorts of things. There's lots and lots of different ways of doing this stuff. Most of it's completely you just buy it off the shelf now for a few pounds a month for the most part. Often it's free. Can we just stick that sort of stuff together? Because actually in reality, members are going to be very familiar with it for the most part. They can know how to use it, and you're not going to have to teach them a whole new way of doing things. Whereas if you go out and invest lots of money in an app or some kind of big piece of digital development, you're going to be teaching them a new interface. You're going to have to really think through every step of everything. So often, like using these kind of commodity, cheap, familiar tools, which already have a lot of good usability built into them, otherwise they probably wouldn't have been popular in the first place, that's a massively helpful thing to do. And then the last piece is about collaboration. I mean, we're a union movement. This is a TUC event. The opportunity is always to share what you learn, to work in the open, to talk about what you're doing, to talk about what you're learning, and to share that learning widely with everybody. Yes, some unions are in competition with each other, but for the most part, we'll all move forward together if we're open about what we're doing, the way we're doing it, what we're learning, and what we're building as a result of it. So those principles, I think, are a really useful encapsulation of the type of approach that I think unions should be looking at in terms of how they do their digital development and their organising and their mobilising people. So I'm going to kind of take it back to the beginning of that and make this kind of assumption about how might we make our unions more digital, even if we don't particularly have lots of time, lots of money, particular experience, big digital team, you know, software developers, etc. How do we do this work, start with this work without any of that? And a lot of my background is in doing that, is in drawing together small groups of people without any particular digital experience and trying to guide them through the process of researching a problem, beginning to explore a solution, and thinking about how to scale that up into some sort of meaningful product that begins to have an impact on the kind of union's operations and bottom line. So, why do we try this? Well, firstly, I think agencies are very expensive. You know, it's very straightforward in some senses to go and say, look, we want to spend a bunch of money on this thing. You know, here's a problem. Go and find out for us. But a lot of what you're paying for is teaching that partner, as it were, to understand your problem in the first place, to think in the same way that you do, to understand all of the nuances of why things have become the way they are, and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of that going on, and also, you know, they have their own overheads. So one of the things that you're trying to do is to think about how do we test our biggest assumptions and learn our biggest lessons before we start spending lots of money. And that gives us a great opportunity to really own the solution. You know, it gives us an opportunity to say, look, this is, we think, the right thing to do because we have learned this, this, and this. You know, and my experience of working in these small groups is that everyone knows way more than they think about these kind of digital processes and some of the things I'm going to talk about over the next 20 minutes or so. So yeah, it's about trusting yourself, you know, and believing that you can start to solve these problems, you know, even if you don't necessarily have them in, you know, in your job type or those sorts of things. So we're going to call this a lean way to approach this. If you want to, you know, read more deeply into the subject, there's lots of books about things called like the lean startup method. Essentially, it's this idea of a kind of incremental approach to making this work. And so we have this is a very famous graphic. This comes from Spotify, actually made this graphic. And so basically the way that they describe their products is that the world, you know, of trying to get from A to B or building a car does not involve you taking one wheel, at which point the user is still unhappy, adding a second wheel, at which point the user is still unhappy, adding a chassis, at which point the user is still unhappy, before building the final car, at which point the user is finally happy and can get from A to B. But instead to think of the way that we're doing things as building a skateboard, a scooter, a bicycle, a motorbike, and then a car. So the user is always able to get from A to B. It just so happens that there are different levels of sophistication and comfort to doing so. And as we find what the right features are, we're adding those features and we're improving our product. But that the core basic use, which is getting from A to B, was there all along. So this is this idea of the lean kind of incremental method to developing products. And I suppose what I'm talking about today, again, is focusing on, you know, stage 1 and maybe stage 2 as much as possible in order to start exploring things, rather than necessarily saying we can go out there and we can just buy a car because we know exactly what the answer is. So that takes a 6-step plan, and I'm going to try and talk through briefly each of these steps. There. So the first is creating a team. All the success of this type of work is done in small groups. You know, the Amazon, you know, version of this is what they call 2 pizza teams. So any team that can't be fed with 2 pizzas is too big. And you know, I think it's a useful analogy. It's a small group of people who can know each other quite well. They're drawn from a diverse set of backgrounds. They might come from, you know, different places within the organization, but you put them together and they're the unit which is going to solve the problem. The second is research, you know, understanding the problem, understanding users, understanding their lives, understanding their work, understanding their relationship to the union, all of these sorts of things. Again, trying to get as much of that understanding into your team as possible. The third is sketching, idea development. How do we do this in a light way that doesn't involve lots and lots of, you know, don't need graphic designers or anything fancy. Let's just get our ideas out on paper and start to talk about them. Fourth is prototyping, cheap ways of exploring ideas and showing them back to real members without, again, having to invest in kind of the final answer. That piece there, that, you know, talking to members is kind of more research. What do we learn when we show things to people? And the 6th is piloting before you commit to a big build, again, so just trying to increase those levels of sort of sophistication and fidelity and understanding in your ideas as you go. So I'm going to start by talking just about teams. So the teams that I try and put together for a lot of the work I do are small, 5 to 8 people. They'll come from, you know, maybe they'll come from comms, they'll come from organising, they might come from legal, they might come from finance, you know, there might be digital people. Not always, not every organisation has people who are sort of solely dedicated to that. But essentially it's about that kind of sense that you're all a small team, you're from different backgrounds, and you're committing to finding and working on problems together. And you're going to meet regularly, and you're going to give yourselves time, and you're going to talk, and you're going to use various structured methods that I won't go into in too much depth here, but you know, ways of kind of voting and sharing ideas, and we do lots of sketching and post-it notes and all that sort of stuff that you see in the sort of, you know, trendy digital design studios. Well, anyone can buy a pack of post-it notes, and anyone can start to use some of these methods and start to use these to think about structuring problems and you know, ways of kind of democratically discussing problems and so on. So the team is the unit of success here. It's not an individual, it's not a partner, it's a group of people who can come at a problem from a diverse range of perspectives and understand that. The second thing that we're interested in is researching problems. Now, you know, the way I think of union membership is as a journey, right? You join at the beginning and all being well, you retire at the end, and you've been a member entirely throughout. But you take part in various ways. You might get more involved, you might become a rep, you might get you know, involved in campaigns, you might do all sorts of different things. But we really need to understand that journey if we're to make improvements to it. So, you know, how do we understand that journey? How do we really get deep into it? How do we understand how people are organised, how people are mobilised, how they're motivated? Well, we talk to them. You know, it's the key thing in this is really talking to people. You cannot understand what you're trying to do with and for people unless you're talking with them. And so the way that, you know, again, I think about that is very simple. Firstly, you know, the team of people should find time, make time to talk to real members about specific things you do. You know, talk to them about their experience of joining. You know, what were their hopes? What were their fears? What did they find as they went through the process of joining? Talk to them about engaging with a campaign. What did we feel about this, about the way that the union was, you know, promoting this particular issue, you know, mobilising people around it and so on. You know, talk to people about how they engage with the union when they have a specific problem at work. You know, how do they get help? How do they look for help? Where are they looking? Who are they finding? What's the experience of having, you know, casework, for example, managed by the union? So you talk to them directly and specifically about the things that you're doing in order to listen really closely to what they say, hear what they're saying, and begin to give you a sense of where you might try and make things better. The second place that I think is really useful to talk to people is the people who then talk to members directly. So, you know, places like call centres or member contact centres, you know, email inboxes that are full of emails from members, obviously reps, people out there, you know, kind of in the field working on these things day to day. Talk to them. They're going to hear where the pain points are. They're going to hear where unions are meeting expectations and where they're not meeting expectations. You know, particularly if you're staff and you're sort of back in a kind of headquarters, you know, you can sometimes be a little bit away from the problem. And so, you know, talking to the people who are talking to people directly is a huge source of insight. I remember I was working on a project with one union where they did have a, you know, fairly large contact centre. We had the head of the contact centre in the team and part of the project. And she just shared every possible insight and every possible conversation and all of the scripts they were using to talk to people and all of the ways that they were directing different queries in different places and the places where members would come up against dead ends. An incredibly useful way of understanding the problems that members face. And then the last is surveying them. And when I talk about surveying, I don't necessarily mean, you know, a big quantitative piece of work where every member gets surveyed or everything. You know, create a simple Google form, a bunch of open questions about the problem you're trying to solve, and email it out to, you know, some people, you know, tens of people, a few hundred people, and really read and listen and understand those verbatim responses. It's just a way of gathering, you know, responses from people that maybe is a slightly different and sometimes some more thoughtful, more considered version of having a conversation with them. And what we're looking for as we do all of this research is we're looking for pain points. We're looking for what's not working. What's the point at which there are always more questions? What always needs more follow-up? What's messy? What's inconsistent? What's disappointing? When does a member feel like, okay, that worked at the beginning, but that's no longer working now, or I've kind of lost track of what's going on and I have questions and those sorts of things. What's putting too much work on the member? Where are there opportunities to potentially take work away from the member if they're having to, you know, go and find lots of documents to complete something? How can we do that? How can we create experiences that are more consistent. So again, like through these conversations, you begin to look at these pain points, and those pain points are the types of problems that you're looking to solve. You know, the pain point that Netflix is solving is having to go to the video shop. You know, love it or hate it, the pain point that Uber is solving is that you no longer have to remember the phone number for the local minicab office. You know, these are the problems that people have, and they want solved for them, it turns out. And you know, regardless of the way that ultimately they're done, you know, there is some opportunity to create greater utility and kind of happiness by solving them. You know, and those then sort of translate themselves into problems. Why is it so hard to join our union? Why don't people know who their rep is, you know, at work? Why don't people understand how they can get support from us? Why do so many of our, you know, contact details fall out of date? Why do people email us asking for logins to the members area and these sorts of questions? So the more we can start to identify these pain points across the members' journey, you know, the better the chance we have of understanding how we're going to solve them. And again, it's as simple as this: your goal is to fix your members' pain. You know, they will have it. No union is perfect. No organisation is perfect. There are always painful points. You know, but the way I think of this is you're trying to constantly work on these and fix them and improve them. So how? So again, more research. So the first thing I think about when you get to kind of looking at a specific problem is mapping it out on paper. What happens right now? How do we draw the experience out? So say it's joining a union. You know, people are coming to this from the perspective of, well, either they have a problem at work right now, and that's happened already and they want to try and solve it, or they have this kind of general nagging sense they should probably join a union. There are other people at work who do, you know, that people in their families are members, etc. So there's sort of general sense that they should do it. But what does that look like? How do you approach that, you know, that challenge of joining the union? How do I find the right one? You know, how do I work out where the join form is? How do I work out what information they might want from me? What are the expectations in terms of paying for it? What are the expectations in terms of the, you know, the ultimate union rules that I'm signing up to, and so on? So draw a map left to right and just set out the stages of what's happening, so that you understand what those kind of key decision points and what the things that you members are trying to achieve in doing that actually are. And then step back and look at it. Where are the pain points in that journey? What are the things that we don't understand? Where are we making big assumptions? You know, oh, look, the member wants to join us. You know, it's not a binary situation, right? Many people try and join, they don't succeed. Many people think about joining, they get halfway, they think again, they come back later, they do it again. How do we understand all of that there based on the research conversations we've had and so on? So circle those pain points and try and draw them out, because they're the challenges that you're looking to solve. You know, again, this is a kind of framework for thinking about it. It's the before, the beginning, the during, and the after. Where are people coming from? What value are they expecting? You know, how are you working out like what's happening during the process of doing something? And then what happens afterwards? What do they think? What are their expectations for what happens next? Will they want to use this service again? Will they recommend it to others? So breaking it down into those stages, again, just helps you think about this in a structured way. And then the other way I like to think about it is in terms of layers. So there are two layers really. One is called the front, you know, if you imagine it's a bit like a play, one is the front of stage. These are the things that happen, sort of direct interactions with members. And then the backstage. So what's happening behind the scenes to facilitate that happening. So, you know, that might be, or the front of stage might be your website, or, you know, text messages, or you know, phone calls that support these sorts of things. Your organizational activities are a bunch of things that, again, are trying to build up the information you need in interaction with a member. But behind all of that sit the systems, your database system, your, you know, your email provider, and all of the kind of, you know, sort of organizational inputs as well, like solicitors who help with legal advice and people who print stuff and all the rest of it. So there's a bunch of stuff that happens in the front, a bunch of stuff that happens in the back, and it's worth thinking about the interaction between those things as you go on that journey map from left to right and start thinking about all that stuff. Because each of those things is an opportunity for improvement, for refinement, for kind of smoothing things out. Excuse me. And so then by combining those two things, you end up with this opportunity to kind of map out a particular moment in the member journey. So before, begin, during, and after, and looking at that across these different layers. And then, you know, you can start filling this in. So if this was for joining, it is, you know, before is this kind of nagging sense that I must join a union. Beginning is arriving on the website, seeing the join button in the top right corner, probably of the website, clicking it. During, it's going to ask me about who I am. It's going to ask me where I work. It's going to ask me how much I earn. You know, it might ask me to accept the rules of the union and a few other bits and bobs before I accept it. And then once I've completed it, what are my expectations from there? Am I going to be onboarded in some way? Am I going to get a membership card? How long is all this going to take? Am I covered right away? So you think about all of the processes that go into this, as well as those kind of, kind of member interactions on the front of it all. Once you've mapped that out and you kind of circled these pain points, I suggest you sit down for an afternoon and just sketch. So as a team, you sit down with some pens and paper, nothing very fancy, think about that research, think about your journey, and start thinking about solutions. Like, how are we solving this kind of circled pain point? How do we make that better for users? And you draw pictures. They don't have to be particularly high fidelity, but they're enough so that your team can understand what you're thinking about a problem and how you're proposing to solve it. And then you can start to discuss those, put them on the wall, talk about them. What do you think works in the ideas? What doesn't work? What have you missed? What could you do better? Which of the solutions proposed by the team members do you think is most likely to work? And again, like, share your feedback, talk to each other, work as a team, keep all that feedback because you're going to need it. And so once you've got your sketching, you can start getting into this idea of prototyping. Now, prototyping sounds very fancy, but again, it's the cheapest way of testing your assumptions. In the way that we're now going to do this, we think that X is going to happen. Well, let's find out whether X is going to happen before we commit lots of resources to doing that. So we're going to test those assumptions as quickly as possible. Will people use this? Does this make sense? Is it clear? Is it logical? So what are those assumptions? How can we test them? And we're going to bring together all the ideas, the best stuff that we did in our sketches, and kind of combine them together. So really think about what the new user flow might be for a particular problem. Like, are we going to now, okay, well, we realized that actually we were asking this question previously that was very illogical and lots of people didn't understand, and therefore they weren't joining the union. Or, no one was reaching the point of trying to join a union in the first place because we buried that thing 11 steps deep on our website, or we made it very complicated, or we made it seem very expensive, or any of these types of problems. So let's think about that flow again and think about how people are moving through it, and make something as quickly and cheaply as you can. So I often use PowerPoint or Google Slides or Keynote to start prototyping things. You try and use the real words. You might use your real logo, but you're not doing anything very sophisticated or fancy. Excuse me. If you're looking to capture data, you could probably do it with a Google form. If you're looking to send emails, you can probably do it with MailChimp, which has a good, landing page and survey software built into it. You don't really need to spend any money at all to build prototypes. You can just take a little while just trying to map out that journey, map out that flow, and try and imagine what the ultimate service might look like so that you can learn something from people starting to use it. Because what you do then is you do get more research. And again, this is this recurring theme of always trying to research what you're doing before you kind of make a bigger investment in it. So take your prototype, so whether that's a PowerPoint slides or Google Forms, and sit with people and watch them use it and talk to them about it and hear what they say. This doesn't make sense. I don't quite understand this. This looks good. I like this. Learn from what people are saying and repeat that several times. So what you're looking for is, as people go through it again and again, the same recurring themes begin to emerge. If you talk to one person, they might tell you one thing. If you talk to a second person, they might tell you another thing, but the third person might tell you the first thing over again, and suddenly you begin to realize what's important in what you're doing. So again, do this stuff a few times over and you begin to learn, and then you can start to make revisions to what you're doing. And so at this point, you have an idea that you're beginning to think, okay, well, we've learned something, we understand the problem, we understand a potential solution, we've learned something about the way people respond to it, and we have a much firmer idea of what we actually want to do. So up to this point, these steps 1 to 5, I completely recommend this type of approach to almost any digital problem before you go out to any kind of pilot, before you go out to agencies or partners or anyone else, so that you really know the domain you're trying to work in and are doing your best, you've kind of got your best underpinnings for going forward. And so we're going to go on to a pilot. The idea from here again is we're not yet saying, okay, we're going to commit everything, we're going to push all our chips across the table behind this idea. We're going to say, again, does our idea work? At this point from our pilot, if it doesn't work, well, what have we learned? What don't we know? What do we need to find out now? How do we approach the problem differently? If the idea does work, well, let's go to that pilot stage. If we don't have the skills in-house, we can start to look for a partner. But the great thing is that you've built something in your research and in your prototyping and in your testing that is effectively the brief for what you're trying to do. So, okay, now we understand how we might want to organize, reorganize our kind of joining experience. Or now we want to think about how we do casework again. We have some understanding of the biggest problems in that space. and we can kind of back that up with some data, and we can begin to talk to people about how to work on that with us. So your prototype is their brief. So just to kind of sum up, because I'm talking a lot, I realize, you know, not like the approach where you're trying to build a car from scratch. You don't, you know, the approach where you're trying to learn incrementally, build up as you go, going through those stages of skateboard, scooter, bicycle, motorbike, car, always having something functional, always delivering a real idea that people can use and learn something from before before trying to just buy the ultimate outcome. And to do that, creating a team, small team, doing as much research by talking to people as possible. I mean, I know of organizations who kind of almost have a formal commitment to everyone in the organization must talk to a customer, you know, at least once a month. You know, sit down for an hour and talk to a customer about their experience of engaging with that organization. I don't think that's an unhealthy thing for unions to start to do at all. I think it would massively increase the closeness to members and understanding of the way that they live their lives. You know, sketching your ideas out. Again, how do you communicate what you're trying to do cheaply, quickly, and in a way to open up conversation and ideas around it? So again, rather than doing kind of formal processes of design and you know, that sort of thing, you know, how do we just start to explore things together? Fourth point being prototyping. So again, making things that people can engage with in order to test those big assumptions and test your ideas as early as possible. Really, really important. And when you're doing that and showing those ideas to people, really listening to what they say so that you can make them better. You know, you might not come up with the right thing the first time, but what they tell you when you show them something will help you go back a second time and work out what the right response is. How do you solve this problem for them? And then the last piece is about piloting before you build, keeping it small and cheap to start. And I think what we'll do now, John, if it's all right, is we'll move on to Yasmin. And Yasmin's forward actions example is very much the idea of taking an idea forward kind of into a pilot stage and then using lots of data to try and test and improve and learn from it from there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sam. Yeah, before I run Yasmin's presentation to you guys, just to say a bit of kind of context to that. So TUC, we've been working with a group called Forward Action, the digital engagement specialist consultancy that Yasmin works with, on how we improve our tools for recommending unions. It's an always evolving piece of work because it's really core to what TUC wants to do. And in the past, Sam himself has helped us 3 years ago, I think, on understanding the journeys that have been involved as we refer people to which union they should join. We're regularly getting about 8,000 people a month come through our Unionfinder tool to see which is the best union for them, and we then send them on to our affiliates. But when the lockdown started, this really spiked. I think we had just shy of 30,000 requests coming through in April, and it's stayed high since. Now, the majority of people who come through this tool start it and manage to complete it okay. Work quite a lot on it. However, anybody that we lose on that way is a missed opportunity. If we could improve the conversion rate of that, the rate from people who start it to finish and then join a union by just 10%, over time, that's a really good result for the movement. So if you look at our Unionfinder on the TUC site at the moment, you'll see what is actually a live pilot test. It went up middle of last week. And it's a pilot that we're going to be using for a few weeks to get a bit of learning out before we then go on to spend money on developing the final version that got the best results. So before we got to the point of working with Yasmin and her colleagues, we did a bit of desk research and individual research ourselves. We looked through all the statistics, how our tool was working, why were how were people finding it through search, what times of day they were coming, as much as we could find out about them. And when we looked at qualitative research, we stuck a chat box on the tool and we talked to people as they were going through, which was quite illuminating in finding out what were people's problems, why were they coming to us. And then armed with that, we went to Yasmin and her colleagues to discuss what we'd found and devise the things that we need to know and test about our new Unionfinder before we commit to a bigger build on it. So this is a piece of work that's never going to be done for us. We can always improve it, but we're trying to make it work and convince people to join unions and match them to unions as absolutely effectively as we can. So I'm just going to try and see if I can share the video that Yasmin has prepared for us. So share screen. Okay.
Hello. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you all today about the work we've been doing with TUC around the Unionfinder tool to improve the user experience, and about some of the best practices and principles we here at Forward Action have found work for improving engagement and conversions on action pages. So to start, I'm going to show you screenshots from the previous tool, just to refresh your memories. Then I'll walk you through the Unionfinder tool, which is now live, and point out things we've changed. I'll touch on the testing we've done, the testing we will be doing in the coming weeks, and how we approach testing more generally. So first, here's just the old Unionfinder tool. I'm going to just go through the slides quickly. And now I will show the new Unionfinder tool. So here you'll see the new version. We've kept the design clean and simple. We've reduced the amount of copy at the start and actually all the way throughout. And we've also added an initial step here where we ask people why they're here. And this is more to help provide the user with a better experience so they don't waste their time going through the process when really what they need is immediate help. If you do need immediate help, this pop-up appears. Otherwise, you can say, I'm interested in joining a union and go on to the next step. And from here on, it's quite similar in the format as the other union tool, its previous union tool. It's just how it's designed and how the copy is laid out. So again, if you clicked yes, you can always go back. It will point you to go back if you do have a union already in your organization. Same if you're not sure. And if you click no, you will see there's an option to find it, to search by industry and also job title. And there's also the option if you can't find your job. One thing I wanted to note here is that we have steps that we've added along the way, and these progress steps are something that we've seen help improve conversions because it not only tells people where they're at in the process, but also how much they have further to go. So just so you can see, I'll click the I can't find my job so you can see the form that pops up, and it's similar as before. Someone would submit their information and they could get additional help finding a union. If someone is able to find their industry, they would select it. And here what we've done, as you can see compared to before, is we've actually created subsections within each industry just to make it a bit easier for the user to be able to find what they're looking for. And here it's similar as before, where a user can start typing and find the options. So if you wanted to find accountant, it would be there. And if you were to click next, that would then lead you to options. And here, as before, the results that you get are randomized, so they will appear in different order each time. So I've sort of talked about this throughout, but just to go back through some of the things that we've changed is we've streamlined the design. So we've cut down the amount of copy. We've done a lot of tests on action pages and have over the years and have found, keeping it very simple and streamlined, keeping it visually appealing, and also balancing that with accessibility makes it a much simpler user experience overall. We've reduced the amount of copy, and we've used simple, really emotive language and emphasized the value of joining, which is something we had talked about as being important in the initial strategy conversations. We removed steps where possible, but we also thought about where we needed additional steps compared to the old tool, just to be sure that we were giving users the best experience possible. We added the progress circles, and as we talked about, and kept it to one action at a time on the page. So removing things like share buttons on certain pages just to make sure that the user had one step to do and complete. So from now that we have everything done and designed and built, the thing now is for us to do some testing. And this testing is really for us to better understand the users, how they're interacting with the tool, and to get a better sense of how we can optimize it so that they gives them the best experience and that you have more users completing. In order to do that, we've come up with 4 questions, which will be 4 tests that we plan to run. And these tests will answer these following questions. And really the point of all of these questions and to get to the end is just to see how we can improve the number of completions. So the reason we've come up with these questions for this particular tool is because of the way it's designed. So we'll test everything from simple image variants to testing copy, length, as well as looking how a user searches. And the last thing we wanted to test is data capture, and if there is a way to do it without impeding the number of completions. So generally our approach to testing, just to give you a quick run through, is to take a step back and sort of think about what needs to happen for someone to take an action. So one way we look at this is by using an example of a behavioral model from an American social scientist named B.J. Fogg. And the Fogg behavioral model talks about there being 3 elements that must converge at the same time for a behavior to occur. And this is motivation, which is the desire to do the behavior, ability, which is the capacity to do the behavior, and prompt, which is the cue to do the behavior. So in thinking about how we optimize or how we test, we sort of have this in the back of our minds as to how we get people to do something. So then how we optimize pages is to make it easy to take an action. And we always do this because that's something we can control and that's something we can make simple to make sure one of those 3 steps is checked off. And also the other thing is thinking about where and how we motivate people to take the action on the action page. So some examples just to run through quickly. We make it easy by doing things like having clean design. So here you can see examples of removing copy. Below page ended up increasing donations by over 50%. We make it easy by removing steps. So from having mandatory fields to providing optional fields, phone fields, we now see we have a 20% increase in signups. We remove unnecessary copy. So here you can see the before and after. And as a result of reducing the copy, we have 183% more signups. We make it easy by doing bite-sized steps. So we do things like the progress bars, where we keep it each step of the time with one action for someone to do. And here you see example, it's only one action at a time. So instead of asking people to sign and donate and share, we just say on one page, thank you for signing, will you now share? And an example of how this works is instead of having sign and then moving into a share or donate option on the next page, we break that out. So it's sign, then share, and then donate. And these can be in any order. But we saw here we had a 50% increase in shares and a 400% increase in donations by breaking out these steps. So if you're looking to motivate, which is the second thing we talked about, we do so by using punchy, prominent call to actions. We do so by leading with values and impact and not necessarily policy or heavy jargon. We use emotive copy. Here you can see we have 46% more donations by using copies that a stroke can devastate versus just saying your support will change the lives of a stroke survivor. So again, it hits at the heartstrings. We motivate by priming for high bar actions. So here, asking why this matters to me, even though it's an optional, ended up increasing shares by 35% because it cued people in. And I guess the end, what we would say is to test everything that you can. Sometimes it's not always possible, but if you can't test something in terms of your action page, at least test copy. Thank you. If you have any further questions and want to follow up or want a longer version of this presentation, please, you can follow up with Yasmin at Forward Action. Thank you.
Brilliant. That was, I think, a nice presentation from Yasmin there. Shame we couldn't have her with us, but really appreciate her putting that stuff down for us as well. So we're quite excited to see what results are going to come out of this Unionfinder test, which is live at the moment. You can go and have a look at the Unionfinder on our site now and screw up our test results for us by taking the test. But back over to Sam.
Hi everyone. Well, I'm a little unsure how this works technically. Just opportunity now, and we have 5 minutes left. If anyone has any questions on either of the presentations, I mean, you know, again, the goal, I suppose, of what we're trying to talk about today is, you know, firstly, methods for kind of approaching digital projects in a sort of pragmatic, practical way, and then when you know, what Yasmin's been presenting there. That's sort of much more kind of once it's in use, how do we test and optimize, you know, use tools like Google Analytics, some A/B testing tools and things like that in order to try and increase the performance of those pieces of work. So, you know, if I try and sort of make concrete how I might have done that, you know, in things like the join projects I've been doing with some unions where we're looking at, you know, doing some team-based design exercises in order to understand, you know, the challenges people face when they're joining, think about those steps, make them really logical, try and get the language right, try and get the you know, the kind of the sort of behind the scenes orchestration of that experience right. But then once it's out there and in production and kind of being tested and piloted, to really start to look at the numbers, like how many people are going from step to step to step, are, you know, aspects of that process putting people in the wrong mindset, generating questions that they might not otherwise have had, you know, leading to some kind of uncertainty. And we can start to look at those steps and see, okay, might we redesign those to make them perform better? So I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A, and maybe I'm not understanding how that works. John's about to talk.
In case I'll abuse Chair's privilege a second. Aslam, I know quite a few of our attendees here are from union branches, and is there anything you can suggest about how, at a really micro scale in some ways, you might be able to do thinking about testing and where before you're about to do something, suppose you're about to launch a branch survey, you're about to switch to using Zoom meetings for your branch meetings, you're about to try a form that's going to be signing a joint letter to the employer. Any kind of thoughts on how you might be able to test it in that micro scale where you don't have a big team resources or anything, so that when you do come to do it, you get a better impact?
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly sit down in the first instance and show it to a few people to start with. You know, you know, this sort of thing, you know, shouldn't be a surprise to everybody when you do it. I think it's, you know, at the very least, you see, if you show it to 4 or 5 people, they will tell you, I didn't really understand what you were doing here, or it felt too long, or, you know, this didn't really make sense to me. You know, why are you using it this way? So I think it's important just to get some qualitative feedback, even if you don't have the scale necessarily to go and do some of the stuff that Yasmin is talking about there when you're talking about testing at scale. So that would be my first thing, is always just treat it like it's a prototype. Sit down with some people, you know, in the future when we're allowed to buy people a cup of tea or coffee again, you know, just have that conversation, and that feels like the best way, at least, of ironing out the most egregious problems you might have with it before you put it into production.
I mean, one thing, since getting involved in more in this kind of work, one thing that has been one of my real eye-openers has been how thin you can make a test, and we're talking about with the Unionfinder building a functional prototype in order to test it, pilot in order to test it. But actually, you can even test things with a piece of paper. You can map out what you think your app or your action might look like. You show it to someone on paper. The first time I saw this happening, I thought it was going to backfire spectacularly. And we had a bunch of young workers. We were thinking about a way to introduce them to unions through screens of an app, and so they were out as paper. And we were saying, like, can you click on the bit that you think you'd click on first? And they can look at you askance. But after 5 minutes of talking, they were tapping away on the papers. And we got some real insights into, well, why did you skip that bit? Why didn't you consider this? And there was a lot of really, really useful insight that we got out of that served us really well. But I think as we're just about to be at 3 o'clock and we have another session starting really shortly, I will call wraps on this. Thank you very much to everybody who has attended this one, and there's still a little more happening on Organise 2020. It's been a real experience for kind of those of us involved in it. There's the big night in tonight, postponed from Thursday. We've got a great programme of music and poetry happening, so we look forward to seeing you there for some of the social side of our movement. But thank you very much to Yasmin, who couldn't make it today but did a great presentation for us, and to Sam as well for sharing their insights. Have a nice rest of your Saturday, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.